Podcasters Roundtable, round 114. Has radio finally seen the podcasting light? And based on that topic, I brought in Rob Greenlee, who's not new to the roundtable, but a radio guy. And because you guys have come from podcast movement, at least Rob and Dave have recently, these are related stories. And that's really kind of why I led off with that and why I picked that topic, because coming out of podcast movement, it seems like, at least the lead story, was that there were more radio people at podcasting. And I'm curious why we care, if it's important, all that stuff. So Rob on the new media show is usually the resident radio guy. So we're going to get some opinions about that. And then we're going to talk about some other stuff. And I think Daniel will join us halfway. But let's meet the roundtable. I've practically introduced you already. Dave Jackson, welcome back.
Yeah, Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com.
All right, and Rob, welcome back.
Well, thank you. It's great to be back on the roundtable. It's always a fun time getting together with you guys.
That's right. Where's your show, Rob? Which one would you like us to check out?
Oh, as far as my own shows, I would say the New Media Show, newmediashow.com. It's one I do with Todd Cochran. And the Speaker Live Show, something I do every Wednesday live. Both these shows are live. So, you know, this is like right in my genre here.
Right.
Doing it live.
That's
Do
right.
it live.
Rob's been doing it live longer than any of us, I think. So, and Tyler, also welcome back. No new roundtablers today, but very specifically handpicked roundtablers.
Well, I'm glad I was picked. Thanks so much for bringing me on.
Yeah, I think we were just DMing late last night about something else, and I said, "Do you want to join?" So,
no, there's always more to talk about.
There is always more to talk about. All right. Well, I did lead off with that radio tease. I want to save one of those stories until Daniel gets here. So I will start off with one. Actually, it reminds me, we did cross the 500 sub mark on YouTube. I did a shout out for that last time. I was like, please follow. And the awesome roundtable who's in the chat right now, Jonathan, I see over there, pushed us up over. I think it's like 510. So thank you very much for doing that. Not that it really matters. 500 is a cool number, but that is kind of my question. Tyler, we have a prolific YouTuber here, and I think that's probably what we were pontificating on IGTV and its seemingly demise, or what maybe its demise, but that's not the question. I'm curious, Tyler, since you are a YouTuber, from your perspective, and I promise there is a podcasting crossover to this, how important are YouTube subs? And I mean the numbers, not the people. Of course, everyone who subs is important, but you know what I mean? The number.
So
go ahead and, how many do you have?
Well, so I just crossed 100,000 the other day, which was
congrats. That's
which
big.
Was really exciting. So
I just want my button, man. So you get your button. It's on the way.
Yeah, exactly.
2 years from now.
I got to put a plaque up back here
right.
somewhere.
Then you're a real YouTuber.
Oh yeah, that's how I know I made it.
I actually didn't know. I didn't know you were 100,000. Nice.
Yeah. So that was that was like the big first goal. Now the next goal is harder to attain. The next badge is at 1 million. But so the biggest thing that I've really found with it is that compared to all the other media I produce, so I make a podcast and I like Instagram pretty actively. I do a lot of things, but YouTube has been able to push people or bring people towards all the other platforms more than anything else. So when I just publish things on YouTube that resonate with not just my audience, but the general YouTube audience, and a lot of people see it, that has been able to bring people towards all the other content I create in a way that I haven't been able to do anywhere else. So, on my podcast, I can't like get people to follow me on Instagram from my podcast much, or Instagram to my YouTube doesn't happen much. But YouTube, people follow through. Like there's something about it where I think they get more and more invested in the personality, which podcasting has. That's inherent in podcasting. But
do you think you're talking visual format to another visual format? Do you think that plays any role in going from audio to visual?
So there's sort of two steps. One is that people find your stuff because from what I've heard, it's the second biggest search engine in the world. So, after Google, people are searching YouTube like crazy for everything, for every problem they want to solve, for every question they have about gear, and just no matter what it is they're interested in, like people search YouTube like crazy. And if you're the person they're finding, they pretty quickly will start watching other content that you've done, and subscribe, hopefully, and then get more invested in anything you're doing. And what's missing in other platforms is that extreme discoverability. So on Instagram, you have to show up in a hashtag, but hashtags refresh every few moments. So you don't stay at the top of search results for more than 5 minutes, really. You get pushed down almost immediately. Or in podcasting, most of it is generally word of mouth or referrals, or searches are
new and noteworthy.
Challenging. Yeah. I mean, it's a really different structure of how people find you, right? Like they don't. There isn't this like constant searching for new stuff. So anyway, I've just found that discoverability mixed with deep engagement has been really powerful.
Do you think how much that your niche, I say it both ways and I mixed them there. How much does your niche come into play? Do you think that plays a factor in people? Because what I thought was interesting is you had, I don't know how many subs you had when you started you had a podcast about photography, and then you did a sort of a general interest podcast. It's the Stalman podcast, right? And you focus on things there, but that's more you, and you expanded because you wanted to talk about more stuff, I think, than just photography.
Exactly, yeah.
But that is typically hard to get on a podcast. That's hard to do and get an audience. And maybe one of the reasons is to come up to the top, right? It's when you're talking general interest. So how many subs were you at when you started pushing people towards that podcast, and how many, why do you think they went to that podcast? Because it was a successful move, right? I mean, you started that and you got a lot of, I mean, how many subs, do you know how many subs you have in your podcast?
So from my photography show, I was at about 3,000 after a couple of years, which was great. I was really excited about that growth. And when I saw how quickly my YouTube started growing, I realized that there was a bigger opportunity if I was aiming at a wider audience, because my photography show was especially for professionals. Then once I started doing more general stuff on my YouTube, which is like technology, and there's still photography, like it's got a slant, but it's not so specific. I realized that I couldn't have all those people come over to a professional photography podcast. So I had to do something that was meant for a broader audience, and it wouldn't have worked without YouTube, because like my personality is like, I'm not a name, nobody knows who I am, but as my YouTube grew, that allowed me to push people over. So I went from having, I had 3,000 on the photography podcast, and I started the new show, and now I'm at 6,000 after six months, I think.
6,000 on the general interest.
Yeah,
not the tech sort of oriented.
Yeah. I mean, the one that's just driven by whatever I want to talk about.
Awesome. So
which you were on too.
Yes, thank you very much. Everyone should check it out if you just want to hear.
Tyler, are you posting your full audio over to YouTube?
So I've only done that once. I've only done one podcast, like full crossover podcast.
But it was video too, right? It wasn't just audio on YouTube.
Yeah, so I recorded the whole interview and edited a multicam thing cutting between me and the other person. And it was an experiment, really. I just wanted to see what people would watch, and that got okay. It got poor views for a YouTube video, but good for podcast downloads. So it got 4,000. But I don't think YouTube's the right place for full-length podcasts. What I've seen be extremely successful, and I should be doing for the time.
I think we're doing it wrong here. No, I'm kidding. This has a this is different because we're recording live, but different.
Well, but what I've seen work really, really well is what like H3 podcast is doing, or another one is the Daily Grind. There's a bunch of people that are doing basically excerpts, or also what Joe Rogan does, where it's like they take a bunch of the best like 10 minutes of just like one conversation out of the hour. They post the video of that, and they don't post the whole shows. And then those shorter clips get much bigger views, because that's what people are on YouTube for, is 10-minute conversations. It's much more challenging to get people to click through when they see a 1 hour thing. Like, it's just intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we're again going back to the IGTV thing. I don't think long format works there, but it is an interesting conversation. I am also curious, what do you see? I definitely have an opinion on this, but it's obviously anecdotal from my own experience. How does your sub count on YouTube differ from what you see in your podcast subs? So is there a difference in the type of subscriber? And you can interpret that any way you want.
No, there definitely is. I mean, YouTube subscribers translate to views less than like anywhere else, really. Yeah. So even like the engagement is still very high, but when people subscribe, they don't see your stuff. YouTube just doesn't push it forward to them at all. They don't feel like that's important. So, it's a measure of like kind of personal success. You can feel good about it, and it probably means you're doing some right things, but you're not going to get 100,000 people showing up every time. Whereas with podcast subs, it's, closer to like 80-90%. That like if people are downloading, they're often listening and they're a lot more engaged. So
one thing that I've seen work on YouTube for podcasters, I've seen a few hosts do this, is that they'll create like a short version of the topic that they covered in their podcast and create a really compelling video of it. And then they'll post the full length podcast episode, which basically goes into greater depth. And what I see people doing is they'll watch the video, and if they want to learn more or listen to more on that topic, then they'll go listen to the full length podcast.
Right. That's great.
That's just audio only. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So much work, right? I mean, it's already hard enough to do a podcast. There's this consideration of how much more work can I do, and is it worth it? I think that's the key. Is it worth it? And I think you have to decide that for yourself. Like, you can't just judge by the numbers, right?
Yeah, I think it depends if you primarily want to be a video creator and then just the audio is on the side somewhat. I think if you're coming at it from just an pure audio standpoint, that's probably a big leap to try and do a big, cool production around video too. That may be a big leap. So these crossovers can be a little tough at times, I think.
In classic Roundtable fashion, I'm going to just left field here, but it's related. Are video podcasts dead?
Ooh.
Mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah, my first podcast, which would be like 2005 or 2006, was a video podcast where I would like traditional. I would just like talk, and it was a video of me, and it would be on iTunes. And I can't imagine bothering with that now. Doesn't make any sense.
One trick I did, if you do want to sort of turn your YouTube channel into a video podcast, one trick that I've figured out and haven't really done anything with it yet, after you upload your video, which could be, a gigabyte or something big, YouTube has amazing compression algorithms, and you can download the resulting MP4, and it is so much smaller. And so video podcasts, one of the problems is hosting. They're just giant files, and no one's really made this. There are some options. It's difficult, and it can be expensive. But if you're trying to do this and you're putting it on YouTube, check out the size of that MP4, because what I find is the compression is great, and you could probably even drop that to 640 by 360. Most people are watching on mobile, just if you want to be on another distribution platform, something to consider. But it can be difficult. Video podcasting is difficult.
Well, that's what I've always told people. If you're going to do a video podcast, upload your HD version to YouTube, put that on your website, so when the visitor shows up, they got that, and then make some sort of smaller version for the mobile, and then throw that on your media host so it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg.
Dave, you work at Libsyn. How many video podcasters do you interact with? Is that a thing? Do people ever approach you with issues about video podcasts?
They are a little bit like unicorns. I hear a lot about them. Don't see them a whole lot.
That's how I started too.
Yeah. On occasion, I will have somebody who's like, "What's the best codec?" And then they want to know what the video thing is, but it's very seldom.
In the lead up to the show, I talked about me having a beer on the Roundtable, and I said I'm a hardcore Dig Nation guy. I love, I missed the show, and the best part was them drinking. So, anyways, this is a homage to.
It makes me realize I remember YouTube being announced watching This Week in Tech as a video podcast. That was the first time I ever heard of YouTube. Is that Twit was covering it, and I was watching a video podcast, probably on my iPod.
Yep, that's how I did it. All right,
And the whole topic of YouTube is an interesting one in the connection with podcasting, I believe right now. So
you love what I enjoy about the new media shows. Rob loves the YouTube podcast interact. Something I actually love too, is I do both, and not many podcasters do. And there's an interesting trend right now where all the biggest YouTubers, all of them, are starting podcasts. Okay, and so now they're coming our way, where I felt like a lot of podcasters would try YouTube. Most would not stick with it. Now you're seeing very successful YouTubers, and you're kind of up on that space too, Tyler, right? You mentioned H3 and a couple other big YouTubers.
I was actually mentioning this the other day too, that I think there has traditionally been this weird disconnect between the podcast and YouTube world. Like they didn't really interact. YouTubers didn't get podcasts and vice versa. Like I still hear in the tech space anyway, the biggest tech podcasters are often kind of making fun of YouTubers or not super aware of what they're doing. They just don't take it very seriously and don't follow it. And these worlds fit very well together. I think it makes a lot of sense for the biggest YouTubers to get into this space. I mean, I'm glad to see Casey Neistat at H3 doing it. Like it's a good thing for them to enter it because I don't know. It's a great fit.
Like, it's good for us too. It's good for us because, man, they are bringing huge audiences that were traditionally only consuming on YouTube are now starting to listen to podcasts.
Yeah, now they know how to download one. Now they know how to listen to a podcast.
Which is a very interesting. Go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to mention, and also from a platform perspective, I think we're starting to see some inklings of some movements towards free podcast hosting and platforms that may be positioning themselves to be kind of like YouTube as you look to the future, and that's a little bit of a concern.
Yeah, we're going to hit that.
Are we? Okay.
Yeah, I think Dave has. Awesome. It's related. It's related. Also related. I think this conversation is great because we're talking about this disconnect between YouTubers and podcasters. We see that with radio too. I mean, there are plenty of radio people that have been successful, and I'm going to talk about NPR here in a second, but there's always been a disconnect, whereas you'll find the podcasters making fun of radio and radio just sort of ignoring podcasts, I would say, on the whole. So there's one, I have a story here, why NPR is so successful at podcasting. It has a question mark, so I think the is should be before the NPR, but anyways. And this was just an article, and it's on a radio site. What is this site? This is Radio NK. It seems to be doing a lot of podcasting related radio stories. I don't know what that is. Rob probably does. But anyways, a couple of things I pulled out is I think it was an interview with someone who was at Podcast Movement. And he said, we've been in the podcasting business. This is someone from NPR for 13 years. So NPR has been there since the beginning, right? And that definitely helps. And he said it's about storytelling. Of course, we hear that all the time. And others have struggled because they don't have that heritage. Well, I think there's been plenty of successful podcasters who can do storytelling, but NPR brings professionals, all right? They have massive teams, and they've been doing storytelling since they existed. So that's their thing. But interesting also here was interesting was the revenue from podcasting has become very important to NPRs. They say it's a great source of revenue. He said 55% of the sponsors cross from one NPR platform to another. Some come to NPR specifically for the podcast. In some cases, NPR has them locked up for 24 months. So big commitment from a sponsor. And then also, the funny part is at the end where they talk about when a legitimate measurement system comes into play, right? The beef always is, but podcasts still can't be measured very well, right? That's the excuse.
Still the Wild Wild West, didn't you know that?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I've heard. Todd likes to say that all the time. And but they say when that happens, and of course they're working on this thing called Rad, which Rob can tell us about. He says the revenue floodgates will open. Like that's the secret, right, to getting massive money in podcasting. There's always the thing that's going to put us over the edge, and we know we grow small. Oh, yeah. Anyways, he says from what he understands,
just around the corner, huge hockey stick growth, right?
Yeah, exactly. right. The next best thing. Rob, first of all, what is Rad? What is NPR talking about?
It's basically, to really sum it down simply, it's being able to track playback of downloadable podcasts in the actual player itself instead of tracking at the server side.
But this happens. Doesn't this already happen? I mean, Apple certainly could do this, right?
Yeah, I mean, some of the app platforms are probably tracking playback behavior, but
are you guys tracking playback at Spreaker?
Oh, sure, off of our own players and off of our own apps.
Is that exposable to producers? Can they see that information?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Okay, but and I think the Rad thing is that they want to sort of grab all that info from everywhere and put it in one thing.
All of the players, right?
Which is not going to happen.
Apps. Well, it's going to take time, right? Not everybody's going to build the hooks in here, and basically how Rad works is that it basically you put metadata in the ID3 tags that basically when the media file is played, it activates a URL that's embedded in the media file inside the player, and the player reports home. Basically, it like sends a message back to the server saying, I got played and this is the file. So that would give us access to playback of all MP3 files, whether or not they're downloaded or just played in a, off of a stream.
As long as we're talking app plays though, because it's got to be in that person's ecosystem, right? It's got to be
any player that plays audio could be connected to this. Some of the web players though are pretty simple, like some of the ones that are in WordPress.
Yeah.
I don't know if those are going to have the advanced hooks that you need to have in the player itself to be able to support this.
But the one question is Apple really going to give up that data?
Well, there's negotiations going on at the high levels of Apple right now. So we'll have to see if that works out over the next couple of years, but it's going to take time for this RAD initiative to be accepted. I think most of the bigger players in the podcast space are liking the idea of being able to get client-side metrics because it's going to be more real data. It's going to be more complete.
Wait, did I miss something, or does it include like IP data? Do they have any personalizable information about the listener as well as just whether it was played back?
No, I don't believe so. I think that there's going to be maybe a referrer, like where it was played and what application, but I don't believe that there's going to be any data that would be associated to an individual, because we're talking about web players. I mean, I suppose it could be mapped. That playback could be mapped to on an individual, like Stitcher or whatever. Stitcher built that in there. They probably already know who that user is based on a login, right? But for most web plays, they're basically anonymous web plays unless there's some sort of a login connection with the playback experience.
This is going to run into a great story that we have coming about Panoply, because apparently they do know who is you. Anyways, we'll get to that. Don't go there yet. Don't go there yet, because that's upcoming.
I had a question about Rad. So the only thing Rad is going to do is let me know if somebody's actually listening to my show, not just downloading it.
Right. Correct. Yeah. Actual playback, time spent listening, and then also the ability to know if an ad was listened to. Right. So there's going to be markers in the content that would be reported back to the server.
Apple gives us this data now, right? On Podcast Connect, I can see if someone's played it, how far they played it, if they skipped an ad. Actually, I don't know if that's coming. Has that happened yet? Can we actually see if people are skipping?
Yeah, because you can see where your ads are, because all of a sudden you'll get real nervous because all of a sudden your listenership goes wrong, and all of a sudden you're right back up, and you're like, oh, what do you know? That's a 30-second skip. Okay, yeah, that explains that.
Right.
And then when you click to listen to what you can hear me like, I'll be back right after this. And then it's like, whoop, as soon as you say that phrase.
So I thought I heard something recently, and maybe it came from the New Media Show, because it's practically one of the only shows I have time to listen to. Apple, when stuff is downloaded, I guess maybe this is the same thing. How much of our stats tell us what was actually played? When is it, if we look in Libsyn, I look in Libsyn, and it says I have 1,500 downloads. How many of those do I know? 1,500 downloads from Apple. I guess it splits out between Apple Podcasts and there's
iTunes Store.
Right. How many of those do I know were actually played? Do we know? Is that tracked? Because I thought there was a thing, Dave. Does Libsyn not report the number if it wasn't played, or does it report every download no matter what?
Well, the IAB guidelines is, I believe, I'd have to double check, but I think it's if you've listened to a minute of the episode,
then you can report it. If you are IAB compliant, which Libsyn is, which Spreaker is, which Blueberry is. Rob, is that right? Is that how it works?
Yeah, I mean, well, it depends on what you're talking about here. There's the concept of time spent listening, which is something that Spreaker tracks as well, because we're kind of a streaming platform, so we can track how long people are listening to things. But typically when the file gets downloaded, per se, you don't really know that data. That data kind of disappears in most of the playback platforms. Apple is tracking it because they're able to look at it and plot that playback timeline, right? But most of the platforms are not really doing actual playback metrics per se on downloads. So I know that Todd with Blueberry is getting into partial downloads and trying to back into the data. So if, let's say an episode is downloaded, let's say 30% of the episode is downloaded. Do you count that as a full play, or do you count it as a partial download? How far in, how much data was downloaded? So you could kind of back into kind of a chunk based on chunks. Because
well, and if you know
what
that,
happens,
why can't you report that? Why can't the stat be,
well,
on Facebook, it tells you 10 seconds or more plays, 10 seconds or less plays.
Well, it's hard to know sometimes in the download process whether a person's listening or they're just downloading it, right? So if they're downloading it, it can look exactly like somebody that just clicked play and has a progressive playback experience.
Is this something we need to solve, figure out? Is it possible?
Well, that's what Rad is trying to solve.
Yeah.
Honestly, is being able to know when that download media file is actually played.
It's interesting to me that you indicate that Apple may at some point budge on this. So
possible. It's possible.
It's possible. The talks are happening.
that there's no hard data on radio besides calling people and hoping they don't lie, and there's no hard data on how much of a newspaper I read. I'm always wondering, why do we have to have this? It has to be concrete, otherwise we don't trust it.
So that's the question, right, Rob? Will the floodgates open? Is that what's holding advertisers back? I mean, to be honest with you, I don't care because independent podcasters aren't going to see those type of ads, but I'm curious.
Yeah, I don't think that the floodgates are going to open real fast. I think that it's going to be better and we'll see more money come into the medium. But the only thing that's going to cause the floodgates to open is if all of a sudden we get 75% of the US or the world population listening to podcasts every week. Then the floodgate's going to open, right? It's all about audience, right? I mean, how we count the audience, Dave is right. I mean, there's more data around podcasts than radio has ever had. So I guess what it also gets back to is there's been some players in the medium over the last 5 years or 10 years that have been fudging the numbers. They've been inflating numbers. So a lot of these ad buyers are a little scary of digital data because it can be inflated or, so there's been some games that have been going on in the medium for a while, and they're a little nervous of jumping in too much.
And that's part of it, though, because Dave, what you're implying is that we know the ads work because people show up, and typically this is handled through promo codes, landing pages, stuff like that. So people who fudge the numbers, I mean, there should be some. You got to blame the person who bought the ad a little bit because it feels like there are ways to measure. I don't care if someone tells me they get 1 million, if they'll send 1 million people. Yeah. If you don't actually send it within, it should be a short contract at first. And I don't know, it seems like you maybe get scammed for the first part, but then
I have a little experience going on right now with this, that I recently got a really fantastic sponsorship on my YouTube from a great podcast website hosting company. And they're sponsoring a few videos that basically I just make videos the way I do. And there's a sponsorship insert in the video, similar to a podcast read, like same as the podcast format. And I know that they can fully see all of the YouTube analytics. Like they're used to seeing YouTube numbers. They know they can trust them. But in the end, whether or not this sponsorship is renewed is going to be based on whether or not people use my URL. Like I absolutely know that if nobody follows through and goes to my promo code, they're not going to sponsor me again.
Your influence. Can you send people, right? Can you convert people from that thing? Who don't care if 1,000 people watched, but if one person goes, unless they're selling cars, it's not going to work out.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's all about our ROI for especially the direct response guys. They don't really care what your audience is. They just want to get customers. That's the bottom line. And the thing is about inflated numbers is that that can make it look like that your campaign is not very effective in your ROI. If the numbers are dropped, let's say we do go all in on the V2 on the IAB. That means that the return on investment numbers go way up, and maybe the CPMs go up. So that's the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, we are flying. This is a good one because we haven't even hit. That was one story. We're halfway through. It's perfect. I'm gonna go a little long today. Daniel's about to jump in here, so welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. It's great to be back on YouTubers Roundtable again.
Yeah, YouTubers Roundtable. I love it. I love it. Subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video.
Hit that bell.
Word. Ring that bell, man. What do they always say about the bell?
Ring that bell,
If you
fam.
like us,
Punch it.
click
If
it once. If you don't like us, double click it. Before we move on, there is something I feel needs to be corrected about talking about the podcast stats and stuff.
Daniel's been listening. He hasn't
Yes.
been here, but he's been listening.
I've been listening.
Oh.
IAB measures downloads. And although there is some stuff about listenership too, the thing about like how Libsyn, Blueberry, any of the IAB compliant or upcoming IAB compliant hosts measure things about the 1 minute downloaded or 1 minute listened thing, that's how much of the data needs to be downloaded before it's considered a download, before it will be counted as a download. It's not about tracking the actual listenership. It's about how much.
Which we know a lot of people have their players are set to auto download. All of those are reported because obviously enough data, all the data has been sent.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's where it comes into potentially app developers implementing the RAD technology so that their specific player would support the what would we call it? The mind is blanking right now, but the playback progression, basically, how far did they make it through consumption analytics? That's it. How much of the episode did they consume? The app developer has to implement that.
Cool. All right. I've got another radio related story and podcast crossover. There was a same site that had this other one. It says, why was radio out in force at Podcast Movement? Now we have 3 people who were at Podcast Movement. That's perfect. The answer to this in this article was simple. They said nearly 20% of consumers now listening to podcasts, with a listening base skewing younger and with at least 402, very specific, million in advertising headed to the medium. Radio would be foolish not to be here. Dave, Rob, Daniel, was your experience, did it feel like radio was, did you feel the difference? Were there people there from radio? They also said in the article that they were there to get information and likely there to poach, so which is, poach talent. What was your experience since I wasn't there?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, what was the presence? You probably were involved with these people, right? I say these people, right? We're so separated, just like we talked about YouTubers. These people, these aliens.
Yeah, these aliens to the podcasting space. Yeah. Well, I think it's a complex question that has a complex answer because the radio folks have had a love-hate relationship with podcasting. And that's more on the commercial radio side. Obviously, public radio has been in this medium for a long time. What was interesting about Podcast Movement was the blending of those two worlds. The commercial side and the public radio side were out in force together. Usually what you see is a lot of people from public radio at Podcast Movement, but you don't see a lot of people from commercial radio. And I do also, from a more of a political perspective, having Fred and Paul Jacobs in charge of the track is a warm and safe place for commercial radio people.
These are radio guys. These are guys. Radio.
Exactly. They're friends with everybody in the industry. All the CEOs of all the big radio groups all love those guys and all come out for them at NAB and all of the RAIN summits and all of the radio related events around the country. So just the fact that those guys, and Seth and all those put that track together makes it a safe place for those guys to come. But also it's time, right? Those guys, if you look at iHeartRadio, they're investing heavily into podcasting. You look at Hubbard, who invested in Podcast One. These guys are starting to really come into the medium and say, we need to carve out our niche, also we're going to get left behind.
I was going to ask why now?
Why? Well, why not now? I mean, that's the big event that they can come out to and make a splash and learn from public radio and be a part of the community and be a part of it. I mean, a lot of the radio groups have been kind of hesitant to support podcasting because they couldn't see how it applies. But there's a lot of experimentation on that side going on right now. They're trying new things. They're trying to figure out a way to get into original content in podcasting.
Yeah, that was going to ask you, how does it apply? Like you're talking, so public radio, we know, tells good stories. They create original series. They've been very successful with that. For the commercial radio, this difference.
They're going to do the same thing. I think the model that you see with public radio is the.
How does that save a radio station, though? I mean, like, do they? I assume that's part of the. They're losing losing users. Freudian slip. How does it save? How does it to create a successful podcast, even if they've got a hit? How does that help a local radio station?
Well, that's what they're trying to figure out, right? What's the mix there? What do they have to do locally versus what they do nationally or internationally, frankly? So there's lots of experimentation going on at the station level. I know the iHeartRadio folks have hired people to go around to the stations and help them craft their radio strategies and what they're doing in their local markets to take existing content that they have right now and be able to package it and monetize it. Because podcasting at the station level has always been kind of like an add-on to their on-air sales, right? So they haven't been selling it separately. But now I think these radio groups are saying, well, if we're going to invest in this and we're going to create original content, we need to monetize it. So they're starting to get serious about it now.
Dave,
ahead.
Do we care as podcasters, independents who have nothing to do with radio? Do we care? Does it matter? Does it change? Does it help podcasting?
Well, the one thing podcasting needs right now, more than anything, is more listeners.
Yep.
We got plenty of podcasts. We need more listeners. So if those people can bring more people over, come on down. The water's fine.
Yeah. I mean, we know the numbers are still heavily skewed to radio, right? I mean, listening is still the ad revenue and the numbers of listens, they're still dominant. And that's why they've been sort of easy to push us aside because, the numbers have been relatively small, and they're starting to see those creep up over time. But, so that many people who still listen to the radio, when they get in the car, they choose the radio. If that station also has a podcast, right? ESPN has tons of podcasts. They've introduced so many people who just watch cable television to podcasts, I would imagine, right? So in that way, I think it's really good. Of course, you know what? I did have, let me pull up a tweet. I think someone tweeted me.
Plus, they also have a lot of money to spend. So
here, Jim Harold tweeted me, and he said, "I worked in radio for a decade plus. Inviting them in is not unlike the Three Little Pigs inviting in the wolf. They are about money and tight editorial control. So, is there a concern at the same time? Curious. What would you say to Jim on that one?" My response would be, Dave, what you're saying, more audience is good, right? And I think that there is a role for us to play. They are coming to our world in some way, like we own it or something. But I mean, it is different. And I think they're learning. Rob, you said they're experimenting. They're learning how podcasting is different than radio, that you can't just package something that you had on the radio and throw it into a feed and expect to be successful per se. So
that begs the question. And yes, for the grammarians out there, this does actually beg the question. Are they really doing that?
Are they really repackaging? Is that what you're saying?
No, are they really recognizing that podcasting is different?
No idea. You tell me, Rob.
I don't know. I think some are. I think some are. I think they also want to take their existing businesses and make them compatible with the digital world more.
Because you definitely said, you even said it. You said that they're figuring out ways to repackage and sort of deliver, which to me is nails on a chalkboard, because they're just going to send something down the pipe that was on the air and it doesn't connect with the podcast listener at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly, they have this issue of short segments. I mean, that's how they produce. They produce content in between commercial breaks, right? And I think what they're going to do is they're going to strip out the commercial breaks and stitch this stuff together with dynamic ad insertion and insert new ads into the content. So they're going to take a similar model to their on-air activities, but it's going to be in a lower commercial load, right? Instead of 16 ads per hour, they're going to do 4 or 5 or something. So that's kind of what's going to happen, I think.
This makes me think of
go ahead.
Like just an analogy in my world is when people grew up with television and television ads being like a lot of them, like you're just constantly watching 8 minutes of ads per episode. And now a new generation comes up watching YouTube and Netflix, and we're used to no ads ever.
Or at least
I am
skippable.
sorry, like less ads. But now I came up in the same world of listening to podcasts, and now the radio is intolerable to me. And I think a generation that's come up with higher quality podcast ads does hear that new style, the traditional radio style being inserted into the podcast world as like dated and painful, and I don't think it's going to stick. I don't think that the generation that is coming up on podcasts now will have a lot of patience for that ad model you just described.
Well, I think one of the things to think about as you think about the ads on radio is that the radio industry doesn't really necessarily control any of that. That's a lot of it's controlled by the ad agencies themselves and how they produce their commercial content. The part that radio does have control over is how they produce live reads. So I believe that radio is going to push more towards live reads, or talent reads is another term that's being used. That would be more kind of like voiceover talent doing the live reads for the show. And maybe there's some similarity in the voice cadence between the host and the person doing the live read, not necessarily to deceive anybody, but just to have consistency in the kind of experience in the show. So I think a lot of responsibility falls on the ad agencies to adapt to the digital market more.
By adapt, you mean give the host creative control, like maybe hit some talking points, but let them take it over. Because I literally played an ad for my wife the other night, just because I was like, you can't miss what they said on this. Was hilarious. Like they got to give up control in some way.
Yeah. And Ray, that's part of the solution. I agree.
It is 1:15, so it's time to get to traffic and weather. So
on the nines.
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, what's it looking like? No. Awesome.
Top of the hour
when
news
I hear
update.
That on podcast, I'll go. Yeah, they still don't get it.
Let's roll it back a little bit, because I did imply that Panoply, or that there was a related story of essentially tracking users. Tyler, what is this Panoply megaphone promo story you have here?
I know you're self-conscious about your niche, but I'm surprised you say panoply instead of panoply. Which I think
I can't get them all right.
I'm going to say I think it's panoply.
This is a GIF situation, I'm going to argue.
Right, where your GIF is correct and GIF is incorrect. It's just like that.
It's actually a game. It's not a podcast hosting platform. Yeah.
So I put this in. I don't know if there was any actual news connected to this, but it was a promo that Panoply put out about their megaphone platform that's just promoting it. So I don't know what actually had changed about this recently. I know the platform existed for a little while, but it's just about the way that they're doing dynamic ad insertions. A little while ago, they also teamed up with, who is it? How Stuff Works. And so How Stuff Works is now using those dynamic ad insertions. And it was just interesting to see this video on Twitter that had nothing but blowback and negative response.
I retweeted one of those today. I'm going to read it when I find it, because it was from Feed Press, and I thought it was fantastic.
Every podcast fan that sees this just instantly cringes at the idea that, a lot of why I've been able to tolerate podcast ads for a long time is now going to go away, and I'm going to get these traditional ones. I had the experience of specifically what Panoply is doing, listening to Omnibus, which is a new show from How Stuff Works. Great show from hosts that I've listened to on other shows where they do the reads, and that works great. But now the ads are obviously inserted when I download. So when I went through to kind of binge and I downloaded 10 episodes at once and listened to them back to back, every episode is the same insertions. So I'm now listening to just repeats of the same ads at the same time over and over. And all of the ads were for other shows on the network. For some reason, maybe just my demographic that's being targeted, they haven't sold any actual ad slots to. So I'm spending all this time hearing the same ads for shows on their network, and they're not even making money off of the things that they inserted for me. So
I retweeted something that Feed Press tweeted, and Panoply, Panoply, whatever.
There you go.
They, I'm going to go with Megaphone.
Panoply.
I'm going to go with Megaphone. And anyways, so it's a different take on this whole thing, because Megaphone tweeted, "For the first time in podcasting, target your audience by demographic, interest, purchase behavior, and more. With Megaphone targeted marketplace, see how it works." And then Feed Press, I guess it's called a subtweet. It was a tweet with a comment. Anyways, Feed Press, which I retweeted, said, "Many podcasters make a living with sponsorships in the current model without access to invasive user data like purchase behavior and interest. No thanks. There's enough data collection on the web. Podcast apps are a respite from all of that." So we talked a little bit about tracking users, and I think, Dave, you asked what information is reported back. Is it just have they played it or not? But Panoply, they are clearly going to be able to serve ads against they're tracking people the way that typically the web does, or Facebook or someone else does. They know who you are, what you do, and all this stuff. So that's also the blowback I saw to this.
Man, the tweets. I haven't seen a single positive response to this.
Now, in response to what Tyler was saying as sort of as inserted ads, or to what I'm saying, there seems like there's two things here going on.
Yeah, there's the difference between
what's most of the blowback that you're seeing, Daniel, as you're scrolling through? What's it against?
Well, it's against more ads generally.
More ads. Okay.
I think the audience doesn't know, and they don't have to know, the difference between dynamic versus programmatic. Whereas like dynamic could still be interesting. Dynamic could be, I record my own ad and I use software that dynamically inserts that ad in all of my past episodes. And then I decide to re-record my own ad and insert that into new downloads of old episodes. So dynamic ad insertion is great. That technology has existed.
Or Daniel records 13 versions of the same ad for
Even
different
better.
Markets, right?
Yes.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, programmatic, though, is more like banner ads on a site where the content creator has no control or very little control over what ads display. There may be certain keywords that are matched and such, but there's automatic bidding going on in the background. Stuff is just stuck in there without your being able to approve it before it goes live. Now, maybe like with Google Ads, for example, you can say, I don't want these categories on my site. Maybe you'll be able to get that kind of control with some providers, but in general, it's ads inserted into your content over which you have no control over what those ads are, and you can't hear them before they go out.
I've seen a lot of this play out on YouTube because there exists the traditional YouTube ad insertion, which is what most people think about as the way to make money off of YouTube.
They still have banner ads.
Yeah, a pre-roll plays before, you don't even know what it's going to be for. Yeah, and it stays underneath, and there's a link to the person that advertised at the beginning. And when people start getting to you, I think a lot of them picture that as being like, that's how I can be a YouTuber. That's how a YouTube career can start or something. But the more I've talked to bigger YouTubers, like people that have had real success, the real way to make money on YouTube is insert I guess, what do you call it? Like ad reads, podcast style, where it's like, this video is brought to you by blank, or there's some kind of natural integration of the ad, or that it's like the whole video is like, this is a sponsored video about this product. That stuff pays the bills for significant YouTubers. Like that's the only way that there's real money to be made. And it's funny because I see a lot of people squabbling over the AdSense money, but it takes quite a lot to make that money real, like to make it substantial enough to count for anything, because the ad quality is so low that it's just worth fractions of a penny. So it's so uninteresting for me to see podcasts enter that market of like, if you can get 100,000, 200,000, 1 million downloads per episode, then the AdSense starts to add up. I think not the future to me.
I think it is interesting to look to YouTube. They've blazed this trail, and YouTubers have blazed this trail, right? And I mean independence, where you see people who, like you said, like, no one knows me. I don't have a name. I didn't come from a big network. Like, I'm not a star coming to this platform already. And so with independents making money on YouTube, I am surprised by the revenue that I'm able to make at 50,000 plus subs and off of AdSense, basically. It's amazing to me that works at all. And I think it has to do with the pre-roll, and sometimes those are relevant. I even watch like a movie trailer sometimes, whatever. That kind of works. But it is beer and golf money is what I've always called it in podcasting. It might pay your hosting or something else like that, right? But what you're saying, sponsored, like sponsored content.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, so with 50,000 subs on YouTube, you could turn it into a career if you were doing the right types of integrations.
Right, not Google. And
exactly.
So the whole thing about they yanked, if you didn't have X amount of watch time in a year, it was like 4,000 hours. People were freaking out, but it's like, you know what? That meant no money. Like you don't have to worry about it. You will get there and then you'll make a little bit of money. But you know, the success on YouTube's always been to diversify. And that's been, I think, the podcasting conversation as well.
And, like, I mean, I don't want to drag on YouTube too much. There's so much because I have so much to say about it. But also, like looking at what Casey Neistat's doing, one thing I've noticed is often he'll be using copyrighted music, which means he's not able to monetize a lot of his videos. And these are huge videos. Like when you see the views, they'll get a few million in a couple of days, which is thousands of dollars. And he will not monetize it in the first place because he wants to use copyrighted music. So he's just like letting that money go because he sees that the quality of the work makes him bigger, and like the success is what's able to bring in other money, which is like for him like big sponsorships and things like that. And you know, that's somebody that's already made it, but having that perspective of not worrying about the nickels and dimes as much as the big picture, I think is something we can take away.
Also interesting to me is that YouTube has solved this music issue where I think, you know, Todd is hinting at some stuff, I think, coming up with some music, some big name music, but podcasters in general can't use big music. That's a violation. And I think maybe it has to do with the download, right, Rob? YouTube, you can download in YouTube Red now, so I don't know how that works. But YouTube, if you use a piece of music, they monetize, they give the money to those who have bought into the platform and the system. They give it to that person. You use it, they get the money from your video, right? And which is an interesting thing. You know, I don't know if podcasting will ever see something like that. If you want to see something like that, I say just, it's not worth it in a podcast to use the music. It's not visuals where you need a music bed in general. You don't need AC/DC this time.
Yeah.
Dave, really? Seriously laid off the AC/DC? But, you know, so Rob, what do you see? You know, music in podcasting has always been an issue. Now with Spotify, it's a big issue, right? You can't even have, I'm not even sure you can have royalty-free music when you go to Spotify. It gets all weird.
Yeah, I mean, it is still a mess. I mean, the whole thing with music, I know we offer royalty-free music on Spreaker that you can subscribe to for, I think it's like $100 a year. You can get access to all sorts of, like, you know, soundtrack type music. It's not going to be top 40 kind of stuff. There isn't even a license available for you to use top 40 type music or pop music or any of the popular major label music. You can't even.
There is some process for that. I know it's really hard and probably really expensive because people will challenge you on it. People will say, "Is this a myth?" Dave,
well, I've actually talked to all of the license holders, ASCAP, BMI, all those guys, and they'll tell you that nobody's even presented the option to them. So that's on our shoulders to do, is to go in and present a license to those groups, and then they'll give you feedback on whether or not it's high enough, or and then we can maybe talk about a license. But the problem is that it's downloaded, and once you've downloaded, you've lost control of that copyrighted content. So that's the problem. It can be reshared with other people, and that's what holds them back from even doing any kind of license. But
which is, yeah, I mean, that's I guess a bigger problem for a show that plays music. It's not like if you have a music intro, no one's downloading that to keep it, right? But if you say, hey, here's a great song by this new band and we're going to play it, then you have the full song. Still not a great way to get your music, but
I mean, it's possible that we might see this problem fixed via the streaming music services, or they pay for rights around music, and maybe podcasts that are available on those platforms could utilize the music that's available through those platforms.
Right, like Spotify. So what is the rule? Yeah. What is the rule on Spotify submissions that have music? Podcasts that have music in it. Well, how does that work for Spotify?
They don't allow it.
Zero. Not even if you like royalty free, you bought it.
Well, you know, there isn't really any process to actually review that. So, I mean, let's give an example. So let's say you have a show that you're using, you know, like one of these royalty-free music beds. I don't think Spotify is worried about that.
Right, because almost everyone, there's a lot of podcasts on Spotify, and almost everyone has some type of royalty-free
Yeah.
Correct.
intro
Right.
bit.
So it's really they're concerned about is the major label stuff, right? That's what they're worried about, because that's the only liability that they have is on the major label stuff.
Yeah.
Dave, you
start
must
off
give
your
advice
show
on
with
this
a
all the time.
Jay-Z track, it's a problem.
What's that?
So if you start off your show with a Jay-Z track,
Right.
that's a problem.
Yeah.
Because you must see this all the time, Dave, because Libsyn's works with Spotify and you deal with podcasters.
Well, yeah, I have people that are like, I only play 10 seconds of it, blah, blah, blah. It's like,
The myth.
nope, sorry. No, it's basically no. Unless
What if I play 10 seconds of it, but I'm making fun of it the whole time?
Right. I mean,
Is it
the
parody?
Talking over the top of it, right? Yeah.
I know Brian Ibbett went through a whole bunch of things to do Coverville, and he pays a lot of money a year. Dan Miller, when I talked to him, he said it took him 9 months to get a contract with, I think, Sony to pay them $99 a year to use Taking Care of Business. But he said the biggest problem is the record people have no clue what a podcast is. They're just clueless.
Yeah.
Another divide. We're just finding divides, and we're trying to break through those walls today. That's what's going on here in the Roundtable. All right. Well, do we have another cool story? Dave, you had, I don't think we asked for one of your stories. You have two here, so you get to pick.
Well, the one story, and I actually found another link here, is they were saying, because Anchor
That's a new one.
has come out, and they're going to open up a studio in New York City. And the thing is, all you hear about, like, I'm sure Casey, how do you say his last name?
Neistat. Yeah, you're good.
Neistat. I'm sure he's getting paid somehow. Stat, niche, natch, panoply, whatever it is. They're spending all this money, and I'm like, wait a minute. I thought Anchor's business model originally was, we're going to get ads and you'll get a piece of that. And I actually found a link in TechCrunch, and it's funny because I actually just put in, Anchor.fm business plan, and in this thing on TechCrunch from 2017, I just had it. Doggone it.
Daniel, can you tell, while Dave's looking, Daniel, can you tell us why the ire towards Anchor as podcasters? Why do we make the joke about Anchor? Why do we dislike this group of
the
this
main
app right
thing
now?
is the license that you are giving them by
Everything
being on their platform. You are giving them the rights to do whatever they want with your content.
And by giving, this is they define this, right? Their TOS, their terms of service are saying we get it all.
Yeah.
And you're saying,
now you still own it, but you're giving them no, they don't use the word irrevocable now. You're giving them basically a lifetime license. And it's not only for Anchor to do whatever they want with it, but the license also says that other Anchor users can do whatever they want, almost whatever they want with your own content.
Is this the only problem?
That's
like
the
if people are
biggest
looking, yeah.
Well, it even goes a little deeper than that. I went to the presentation that Anchor gave at Podcast Movement. It was right the last day.
I heard this was a sales job, not a presentation.
Yeah, it was a total pitch. But really, I think the big issue with Anchor is the derivative content that they're talking about creating from your podcast.
Meaning they're going to chop up your stuff and use it. What do they mean?
That's the big question, is exactly what they're going to do with that. But they have talked about creating videos about your podcast, kind of like what Facebook does. So if you think about some of the things that Facebook does, right, with our content on there, Anchor is thinking about those things, right? Creating derivative content of making clips, transcribing, using the content in various ways that are out of your control, right? And at the end of the day, who owns that derivative content? Anchor does. So if you want to move your show, are you going to be able to move that derivative content to another platform? And who else is going to be supporting that?
So I found this article, and they're interviewing one of the co-founders, and it says, but Anchor is still a while away from becoming a full-fledged business. Realize they were started in 2015. So they're coming up on their 3-year anniversary. It's not generated revenue yet. Mignano, which is one of the co-founders, says that Anchor is working on a plan that will allow both the startup and its creators to make money from the content. And the more I look into this, I cannot find any details on what their plan is. It's just like, yeah, we're working on a thing and we're going to make money.
This seems like a thing that several people are working on. apps want to also be YouTube in that they want to help the creator make money too, right? And we know we're not fooled by this on Google. The more eyeballs we bring them, the more money they make in ad revenue, and you get a little tiny piece of that. But it seems like apps, some of these podcasting apps want to do that as well. Is there a difference, Rob? You work for Spreaker, Dave, you're at Libsyn. Is there a difference between these? I don't know if I'd call them traditional podcast media hosts and apps. I guess, how many apps are there? I mean, there's Anchor. I don't know if there's many more apps, but is the mind think sort of different? They said they're trying to emulate Facebook in a lot of ways. Is it different because they're an app and they're just trying to do something more app-like?
From people that I've seen try to use it, like I've seen some people start podcasts that never would have started a podcast because of Anchor. I've seen it happen a couple of times now.
Yeah.
And I do think that's positive. Like,
yes,
I'm definitely suspicious of some things Anchor's doing. Their motivations are probably somewhat mixed, but I think
This isn't your YouTube sponsor, is it? That we're now.
No. I think they are hoping for. I get the impression that they're hoping for the same positive stuff that has come out of YouTube or Instagram or whatever, that take away all the obstacles, and average people without technical backgrounds can benefit from the power of social networks. And meanwhile, we're going to profit. Well, we're the brand name of it. But the fact that they're not admitting to any of it, basically we know what they're doing. They want to do what everybody else does, whether they say it or not. They want to be YouTube, they want to be Facebook. And it could have really mixed results. Like, did the world of photography get better or worse when Instagram became the biggest photography platform? Like, was it better when we all hosted our own websites and that's the only places that you'd find a portfolio? Or is it useful to have this one unified platform that we all know we can go to and see each other's work? Like, it's not a simple answer, basically. There have been benefits and there's been huge detriments as well. Like, it's...
Well, I was listening to Rob Walsh's presentation from Podcast Movement, and in it he insinuates that the median download from Anchor is 0.
Well, so Dave, they're not focused on the listening side. That's what their CEO said at the presentation.
They're an audio platform. What are they focused on?
They're trying to gather up people, the eyeballs. This is a massive, not eyeballs, but ear canals. But this is a massively funded venture capital-based company, right? What are the goals of a venture-based company, right? It's to grow really fast and be disruptive, right? And that's what these folks are doing. They're cutting corners. There's a lot of people in the medium that think that they're cheating in some ways here too. They're auto-submitting content producers into Apple Podcasts through the whole network page. I don't know that a lot of people know about that, but that cuts you out from being able to get access to your stats in Apple's platform based on your Apple ID.
Yeah, that's the one that makes me scratch my head, because I know how much podcasters love stats, and I go, hey, guess what? You're not going to get your stats from Apple. And they go, well, I don't care, it's free. And I'm like, oh, geez. So drives me crazy.
And you talk to Apple about that, and they'll go, they told me that they don't agree with that. It's against what they want. They want every podcaster to have an Apple ID associated with their show, and it's a big issue of customer support potentially for them. So if Anchor brings in a bunch of shows, and then a bunch of those shows decide that they want to get access to their Apple ID accounts, guess what? It's a support issue.
So look, Anchor has changed what Anchor has been like 3 different times. This is just the next move on their way to death, is what I'm actually just hearing. Sorry,
burn rate, guys.
Anchor used to be, I loved what Anchor was when it first came out. Loved it. That said, did I use it? No. I also like Snapchat. I don't use it. But Anchor was the best app I didn't use, because for the first time with my podcast listeners, you would talk into Anchor in your phone, super simple, and people would respond with their voice. And holy cow, it changed the experience with your podcast audience when you heard those people, and the conversations were so easy to have. Clearly that didn't work out. Clearly it's because what Rob said, they wanted to explode growth and make money and just do this app, right, and be an app and succeed. So, it's... they sound dangerous. Like what they keep trying to do is they're trying to make fast money. I mean, I think that was what was that one we used to use with the 4 people in a box?
Blab.
May it rest
Blab,
in
which was
peace.
also
Blab.
great. And he said, I mean, that guy's like, I didn't make enough money with it, so we got to change. We're out of here. So
I need
Well,
to go
it was
back
great.
and find the clip because I had them on my show. I had Blab on my show, and I'm like, hey, like bandwidth isn't free. And they're like, oh, well, we came from this other company where we made like $36 gazillion. We got money in the bank. And the next thing you know, they're like, yeah, we're out of here.
Blab was great too. It's
Yeah.
too bad that they wanted things that were not, they weren't in it for the right reasons.
Right. So I just wanted to point out that Anchor is, again, spending more money because, you know, I'm sure you can't find a recording studio anywhere in New York City. So they're going to build one. Or
Not
whatever
for
they're gonna
free,
do.
Dave.
Yeah.
I want free. I don't want to pay for anything. That microphone, free.
Hey, that's a great business model.
We know how that works out.
Yes.
This whole zero listeners thing reminds me of a really great piece in The Verge last month about Twitch. So as I was reading it, I was just translating everything to the podcast world. And it was about all of the streamers on Twitch that are streaming to zero people that will do it for months or years. And like there's subreddits about it where just a lot of people are like, I've really been trying to grow it for years now. And sometimes I'll have like 2 or 3 people and they just keep streaming for hours and hours at a time.
Now, we need that kind of resilience in podcasters because podcasters
Exactly.
put out episode 1 and they're disappointed that they don't have more than 5 downloads.
100%. No, it's true.
Wow.
But so like what I was seeing, what it made me think about though is that the way that Twitch works has some of the same issues because when people are watching, they can only watch one person at a time and for a sustained amount of time. Like, you'd watch somebody stream for an hour or more, and podcasts can be similar in length. Like they're relatively long. You have less bandwidth per day. You can only really afford to subscribe to so many shows per month, per week, realistically get through. So if Anchor wants everyone in the world to start their own show and be their own podcast host, it's not surprising that they're not concerned about nobody listening because they're not kind of doing the math of what's happening on Twitch, that like some people are becoming massively successful and getting millions of streams concurrently, but it doesn't leave a lot of audience for the rest of them.
Plus, the numbers are starting to come out showing that the percentage of pod fade coming out of Anchor is extremely high, and that pod fade number is hitting as low as 3 episodes.
And that's part of the making it super easy to start is going to be a higher attrition rate, right? I mean, like you find out, wow, this is hard to do on a weekly basis.
Well, that's one of the things I liked about, we were talking earlier about radio people coming in. I kind of like that because you gotta, some of those are going to be good. And that might actually scare some people like, well, I can't compete with them. And so the 4 guys, 1 brain show is not going to happen. And I'm like, is that really such a bad thing? I don't know. And those people that really want to do that, cause I want to connect with my old high school buddies, they're going to do it anyway. So
That's right. Yeah.
So I'll be interested to see if that has any kind of that effect.
Cool. Well, I think we're good on the stories. There are, of course, more to get to. Daniel, you thought maybe you might want to give a thought or two on podcast movement. 3 of you guys were there, so if there's something you want to say about that, and then we'll head on out.
Well, I'll share a different story, actually, not podcast movement related. This came from Chris Nessie in the chat room. Android Auto will soon support Google Podcasts. Google is testing the Google Podcast support on Android Auto. And I think this is a good thing because more and more cars or automobiles are coming out with Android Auto and CarPlay support. And I got my first chance to drive a car, not ever. I mean,
Ever?
first chance to drive a car with CarPlay.
What was it like?
It was so exciting. I put my foot down and I went somewhere. Wow.
Congrats on living.
Story of my life. The cool thing, I could use Bluetooth or connect my phone via a cable, which I chose to connect my phone so it could charge, but I could play my podcast through the CarPlay system. And on a long trip, that was really nice, and not to have to mess with earphones and stuff like that. So the CarPlay car audio system connecting to your phone, I think, is a good direction to go because our phones are becoming the hubs for our content consumption. And supporting a way to connect that to your car, I think, is a good idea, not to try and make your car a consumption portal or consumption hub, but connecting it to something else. So Google Podcasts being soon to come to Android Auto, I think will this. I'm not saying it's going to be huge, but I think it's a really good step, and I'm really glad that they're already looking at doing that, and we'll probably see that released in the next couple of months.
Emily says it works with Pocket Cast, my personal favorite. So it's interesting.
And also these smart voice agents are coming to the car too. So we're going to see Siri.
Well, they got to do something because we're not listening to podcasts on them. That was one of those numbers I saw coming out of
Homes. That's right. Yeah,
less than 1%. It's just someone made a good.
Well,
comment,
it needs to be
comment.
more. It needs to be more natural language. It's too structured in how you have to ask for the content.
Well, just
and
from a consumer perspective,
don't think like that.
At least in the car, you're by yourself. I'm telling you, people don't listen to podcasts together or out loud, right? It's in your ear, but in a car, you're by yourself in general. I mean, not in general. A lot of people commute in their car. So it could be a good fit, right? If the tech is going to, if an Echo is going to work, Google Home's going to work.
It's a personal medium, right? Yeah.
That's the word. That's the word.
That's what we keep hearing.
ASMR. All right. Enough goofing around. It's funny because as we get further on into a podcast, this is over an hour now. This is typically an hour show. I feel like it's okay. It feels more freeing to go off on a tangent or talk about things that are more personal or have more fun, because at this point, if people are still listening, they're in, right? They enjoy listening to Dave, me, Tyler, they're in, and I don't think it matters. So I have this internal clock where I've hit the threshold where I don't have to get to the point as much or to get the most important stuff out. I don't know, maybe I'm a YouTuber and I'm just like, hey, look, if I talk about anything else than the point, they're going to drop off. But so anyways, we will wrap it up, but we'll thank everyone for joining us. I actually enjoyed this one a lot, so thanks everyone. Daniel, thanks as always, co-hosting duties here on the Roundtable.
Thank you. Check out my stuff when it returns eventually, and it will return at theaudacitytopodcast.com and on Twitter at the Daniel J. Lewis.
Very cool. Dave Jackson, as always, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ray. Find me at schoolofpodcasting.com and at Twitter at Dave Jackson.
If you're watching the live or the archive video, you can see it right on his shirt. Good job, Dave.
Thank you, sir.
Way to brand yourself for the entire episode. I love it. See, Daniel's always good at getting in an extra plug, but Dave has got in the plug for the entire hour. So that's next level stuff, Dave. Good job. Rob, you've been here probably too many times. I probably have to not invite you back anymore because
that's right. Yeah,
I can't give you a t-shirt
anymore.
That's right. Anyways, thanks again.
Daniel and Dave's been here more than me, so
yeah, they're branded. They're technically hosts, so they don't count.
There you go. It's okay. But yeah, I can be found at the speakerliveshow.com and newmediashow.com and Twitter. So
very cool. All right, Tyler, welcome back from the Great North. Tyler Stalman, thank you for joining us so much. Is that what they call it?
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks. It is North, and it's great. But yeah, it's been a hot summer in Canada.
Where can we find your stuff? We want to listen to those podcasts.
I mean, I would just search for my last name, Stalman, Stallman, because then you'll find my YouTube or podcasts or whatever you want.
Please tell me you also registered Stall, man. I bet that's taken.
Shit. No, it's been taken for a while now.
I bet.
But yeah.
All right. Maybe 3 L's. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll just keep finding.
Just keep adding L's. It's going to get real expensive. All right. podcastersroundtable.com/guest if you want to join us. If you're listening this far, you are definitely the type that would enjoy being on the roundtable. So sign up and we'll get you in on one of these. 115 will be next. And keyword fortnightly, I want to put that into the algorithm. We are fortnightly. If you play Fortnite, you would really love this show. It has no relation at all other than the name. Fortnite. All right, we're out of here. I prefer PUBG. See you next time. Wave goodbye.